The federal judge overseeing Donald Trump's New York criminal trial found the former president in contempt for the 10th time today. This ruling comes as a result of Trump repeatedly breaching his gag order. Judge Merchan is now warning Trump that jail time is possible if this conduct keeps going. Trump faces 34 felony counts for allegedly falsifying business records to conceal an alleged affair before the 2016 election. Let's bring in Katrina Kaufman and Graham Cates, both standing outside the Manhattan courthouse. Katrina is an attorney and CBS News campaign reporter, while Graham is a CBS News investigative reporter. Great to have you both here. Katrina, I'll begin with you. This marks the 10th contempt finding for violating the gag order. A $10,000 fine probably means very little to Trump, but the threat of jail time might matter. How is this being perceived, and what does it signify? Hi, Lilia. Yes, this definitely shows an escalation in these contempt rulings. The judge seems to understand that these $1,000 fines barely register for Trump. Given his wealth, they're essentially insignificant. So now the judge is making it clear that jail could be considered if this keeps up. And so far, these gag order violations haven't slowed down Trump's rhetoric. If anything, he often turns them into fundraising boosts. We've seen his legal troubles frequently help him in the polls. It almost feels like he's inviting this jail threat, even though it looks like Judge Merchan would rather not take that step. Today actually reminded me of a moment during the E. Jean Carroll trial when Trump was behaving disruptively in that courtroom, something he doesn't quite do here, at least not inside the room, though he does it outside. One day, Judge Lewis Kaplan basically asked him, "Do you want me to have to hold you in contempt and send you to jail?" And Trump replied that he'd love that. Kaplan said, "I know you would." So you have to wonder whether he understands how being jailed during this trial might energize his base. I mean, just think about the huge amount of fundraising that came from that mugshot. It's something he could easily amplify even further and fold into the narrative he's been pushing on the campaign trail. Graham, I want to bring you in now. How much more leeway would Trump have if he weren't a former president? That's something the judge actually referenced. He said, "Look, you're a former president, and potentially the next one." Trump argues this is a witch hunt because he was president and because they want to eliminate him politically. But it sounds like the judge is actually saying the opposite, that putting a former president in jail doesn't look great. Talk to us about whether he benefits or not from having been president. You know, there's no question this would look very different if he weren't a former president and current presidential contender. Normally, in a criminal trial, you cannot talk about jurors or witnesses. And if someone keeps violating a gag order, they're found in contempt and sometimes jailed. Trump's been given a long series of warnings. Prosecutors have said they may someday request jail. The judge has repeatedly emphasized that his biggest red line is Trump talking about jurors. Over and over, that's what he cites when holding Trump in contempt, the instances where Trump brings up jurors, whether in interviews or on social media discussing jury selection. One of the things he said he's thinking about when he's. So here's something that should honestly alarm anyone who cares about whether this country still functions as a nation built on laws or whether we've abandoned that idea entirely. A federal judge has now ruled that President Trump and his administration displayed willful disregard for court orders. Willful disregard. Those were the judge's exact words. And he found probable cause for criminal contempt involving a sitting president's administration. Let that settle in for a moment, because this is not normal. This is not how the U.S. government is intended to operate. This is a constitutional crisis unfolding in real time. And Trump's reaction has been to rage on social media and threaten the judge who called him out. But before we get deeper into this, let's be honest for a moment. Trusting mainstream media today is tough. That's why we created Pump Politics, real stories, real context, no corporate filters. If you want to stay ahead of the news cycle, sign up for our free newsletter. We'll deliver the important stories directly to your inbox. Just tap the link in the description. And if you want to support what we're building, join us and be part of the community that actually values truth. Okay, back to the video. The corrections officers who would have to oversee such a situation, the Secret Service agents who would be required to accompany Trump, the judge mentioned all of that. He understands this would involve more complications than simply jailing a typical defendant. Covering this case, I'm sure both of you see how much occurs around it. Outside the courthouse, behind you, as the campaign moves and gathers. But we shouldn't lose sight of the core facts of the case. Katrina, what did we learn today from Jeffrey McConey's testimony, and remind us why it matters? So Jeff McConey is the former controller for the Trump Organization, and we're finally seeing the actual falsification of business records part of the case. Up until now, prosecutors have been outlining a larger catch-and-kill scheme where they described efforts to keep damaging stories about Trump quiet before the election, to support their broader election fraud narrative. But ultimately, that's just underlying context. The actual charges are 34 felony counts of falsifying business records. And McConey is explaining what happened internally at the Trump Organization as these reimbursement payments were made. We learned about conversations between him and Alan Weisselberg, the former CFO, who instructed McConey to make the repayment to Michael Cohen. We heard the numerical breakdown, and how McConey then informed Deborah Tarasoff, who handled payroll, and who we expect to hear from on the stand, to label these payments as legal expenses and retainers. But what really stood out was that these payments had to come from Donald Trump's personal account. That brings Trump's personal knowledge directly into the picture. McConey even described how they had to create a new system to send checks from the Trump Organization to the White House so Trump could sign them, then send them back to the organization, and finally to Michael Cohen. So now we're really beginning to see the threads of the falsified records evidence the prosecution must prove beyond a reasonable doubt. Katrina Kaufman, Graham Cates, great having you both. Thank you. Let me break down what happened here because the details matter, and they're incredibly damning. Back in March, Judge James Boasberg issued a court order halting certain deportation flights the administration was carrying out. The judge found these flights illegal, violating due process rights and sidestepping established procedures. So he ordered them stopped. Follow the law. Straightforward. This is how the system functions. Courts issue orders, and the executive branch has to comply. That's the arrangement, the thing that separates us from countries where leaders act without limits. But the Trump administration didn't comply. They continued the flights anyway. They treated the court order like a suggestion instead of a binding directive. And when Boasberg learned this, he was furious. He held hearings. He demanded explanations. He gave the administration every chance to justify itself. And what did he get? Excuses that basically boiled down to, "We decided we didn't have to listen to you." That's effectively what they told a federal judge, "We disagree with your order, so we're not following it." Judge Boasberg's response was devastating. He ruled that the administration showed willful disregard, not accidental noncompliance, not confusion, willful disregard. Deliberate defiance. He found there is probable cause for criminal contempt. Do you understand how significant that is? A federal judge is saying there's enough evidence to potentially bring criminal charges against administration officials for ignoring a court order. This is the sort of thing that happens in countries we criticize for human rights abuses, and now it's happening here. The judge emphasized something crucial in his ruling that cuts through all the spin. deliberate non-compliance equals contempt regardless of rationale. Regardless of rationale. Meaning it doesn't matter why they thought they could ignore the order. It doesn't matter what legal theory they invented. If a court tells you to do something and you deliberately do the opposite, that's contempt. Full stop. And according to the judge who reviewed everything, that's exactly what happened. Trump's reaction reinforces how he views the judiciary. He immediately jumped onto Truth Social to attack Boasberg, calling him rigged, claiming the judge threatened him, promising he'd win at the Supreme Court. He's treating a contempt finding like a political enemy he needs to defeat, not a legal ruling requiring compliance. This is a president who truly behaves as if no law applies to him and no court can constrain him. And what makes this more alarming is that it isn't isolated, it's part of a long-running pattern. Judges across the country have issued block after block on Trump's executive actions. We've talked about more than 150 court blocks on different orders. Congress has shut down several of them through the budget process. Courts keep saying Trump is exceeding his authority. And his response is always the same: attack the judges, threaten retaliation, and continue doing what he was already doing. The appeals court developments complicate things further. After Boasberg's ruling, the administration appealed. The appeals court didn't restore the deportation flights but did leave the contempt threat in place. So the legal situation continues to evolve, but Boasberg's fundamental finding remains: the administration intentionally defied a court order. Appeals don't erase that. It's now part of the record, part of this administration story, and it will have long-term consequences. Now let's dig into what this actually means, because this contempt case is not simply about one group of deportation flights. It's about a much bigger, far more dangerous question: does the executive branch have to obey court orders at all? Or can a president simply ignore judges whenever he disagrees with them? The answer to that question determines whether we still have a functioning constitutional system or whether we're drifting into something that resembles authoritarianism more than democracy. First, let me explain who Judge James Boasberg is, because his background matters. Boasberg isn't some liberal activist Judge Trump can easily dismiss. He's the chief judge of the U.S. District Court for D.C. Yes, he was appointed by Obama, but he has a reputation for being moderate and careful. He's ruled against liberal causes plenty of times. He's exactly the kind of judge both political sides historically respected. The fact that he felt compelled to issue such a strong ruling tells you how serious the misconduct was. The deportation flights in question were part of Trump's aggressive immigration agenda. Critics argued they violated due process protections and legal requirements. Boasberg reviewed the evidence and determined they needed to stop pending legal review. That's standard. Courts pause government actions all the time. The government is supposed to comply while the case moves forward. Instead, the administration decided they didn't need to. They kept the flights going, offering excuses about operational necessity or interpretations of the order. Boasberg rejected all of them. He found that they deliberately ignored him, which is the definition of contempt. And remember, contempt is about compliance, not agreement. You can think a judge's ruling is wrong. You can appeal it. You can criticize it. But while it's in effect, you must obey it. If everyone only followed court orders they agreed with, the rule of law collapses. Boasberg found that the administration knowingly chose to act above that principle. The probable cause finding for criminal contempt is serious. Criminal contempt isn't a fine, it's potential criminal charges. It means officials could theoretically face arrest or prosecution. Will that happen? Hard to say. There are complexities around prosecuting executive branch officials. But the fact remains, Boasberg concluded that their actions meet the threshold for criminal contempt. That's now part of the record. Trump's reaction, as usual, was to escalate, not comply. He attacked the judge personally. He posted that Boasberg is rigged and essentially framed the ruling as political persecution. He vowed to take it to the Supreme Court, implying lower courts don't matter. This approach isn't just defiance, it's corrosive to the judicial system itself. When a president tells his supporters judges are corrupt whenever they rule against him, he encourages them to distrust the entire legal process. That's dangerous. Judges have already faced increased threats in the Trump era, and his rhetoric only inflames those risks. This contempt case fits into a broader pattern of administration behavior. Over 150 executive actions blocked. Congress rejecting initiatives. Courts finding contempt. Subpoenas ignored. Late-night pardons. Immigration enforcement defiance. In isolation, each might seem minor, but together they outline systematic disregard for legal boundaries. This also intersects with impeachment discussions. Contempt of court, deliberate disobedience of lawful orders is exactly the kind of behavior that the Constitution contemplates as grounds for removal. A president refusing to faithfully execute the laws is violating his oath. Even if criminal charges aren't filed, the constitutional implications are serious. Judicial backlash is growing, and it's bipartisan. It's not just Democratic-appointed judges pushing back. Many conservative judges have also ruled against Trump because they see constitutional lines being crossed. The fact that the appeals court preserved the contempt threat suggests they, too, recognized problems. As for what happens next, will prosecutors pursue criminal contempt? Will the Supreme Court intervene? Will Congress incorporate this into impeachment considerations? And politically, how will voters respond? Trump's base may ignore contempt findings, but moderates might not. Findings like these become part of the public record, part of political messaging. Ultimately, this raises a fundamental question: can the constitutional system constrain a president who refuses to recognize constraints? Checks and balances only work when leaders respect them. Courts can issue orders, but they rely on the executive to enforce them. Congress can pass laws, but implementation still depends on the executive. What happens when a president decides he is above all of it? We're watching that play out now. This story isn't over. More rulings will come. More contempt proceedings are possible. Congress may respond. And Trump's attacks on judges will likely escalate as legal pressures increase. We are in uncharted territory, and no one knows exactly where this leads. But Boasberg's contempt finding will be remembered as a pivotal moment, a point where a federal judge laid out clearly what the administration had done. And that will matter going forward, regardless of how Trump tries to spin it.